Today's story takes us to the heart of Syria, a land rich in history and mystery. This tale unfolds in the rural outskirts of Aleppo and is told from the perspective of someone who lived it. Whether or not you believe it is up to you, but the storyteller swears it's true. So, let's dive straight into it without further delay. This story happened to me in Syria over 12 years ago, in a small rural village near Aleppo, about 30 kilometers from the city. Although I grew up in the city, my family owned a house in this quiet countryside, a place we often visited during holidays and special occasions. Whenever Eid came around, we would pack our bags and head to that house. It was a tradition for our whole family to gather there. Relatives, friends, everyone. The air was fresh, the scenery breathtaking, and the festive atmosphere unforgettable. There was something magical about celebrating Eid surrounded by nature and loved ones. I've been visiting that house since I was a child, and I have countless memories tied to it. But there's one thing about that place that always gave me pause. The stories my grandmother used to tell me. She would sit us down in the evenings, the shadows long and the nights quiet, and recount eerie tales about strange events that had supposedly happened in that tiny village. Some of the stories were so terrifying they would leave us trembling. I never knew if my grandmother's stories were true or if she had simply woven them from her imagination. But one thing I can tell you for certain, those tales were enough to chill me to the bone. We finally arrived at our destination around Asr prayer, roughly 4 p.m. The journey had been tiring, but the moment we reached my grandparents' house, we were greeted with the usual warmth and hospitality. My grandfather, grandmother, uncle, and cousin Ahmad were already there, waiting for us. As is tradition, they welcomed us with open arms, and we all sat down to rest and catch our breath after the long trip. Surrounded by family, laughter and chatter filled the room as we enjoyed each other's company. Time passed quickly, and before we knew it, it was already 8 p.m. Life in the countryside follows a different rhythm, simple yet strict. People here sleep early to wake up before dawn, ready to tend to their farms and livestock. So, by 8:30 p.m., most of the family had already retreated to their rooms for the night. I wasn't tired, though. After sitting for a while, I decided to take a quick walk. I noticed a window in the corner of the house that was open, so I went over to it, hoping to catch some fresh air. I'd been feeling a strange unease all evening, a restlessness I couldn't shake off. As I stood there, staring into the quiet night, my cousin Ahmad walked up behind me. He grinned and asked, "What's wrong, Ali? Bored already?" I chuckled, trying to shake off the discomfort that had been nagging at me. "Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I feel off. Tired, restless, I can't explain it. My mood's been weird ever since we got here." Ahmad laughed, clapping me on the back. "You city boys are all the same. A little quiet, and you start imagining things." He paused for a moment, then smirked mischievously. "Listen, I'm heading outside. I need to cool off and maybe smoke a cigarette or two. You stay here and keep yourself company. You know how it is. Outside isn't for scaredy cats, cousin." I laughed, though his teasing didn't fully distract me from the unease settling in my chest. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Brave. I'll just hold the fort here." In villages like ours, you'll always find a barn, a small enclosure built for livestock. That night, fate led me to the window of my cousin Ahmad's room, which looked directly onto the barnyard. The barn itself was a simple enclosed stable with a small patch of earth surrounding it, all fenced in by a low wall. It was nothing out of the ordinary, at least during the day, but at night, with the quiet so deep it could swallow you whole, it felt different. That evening, as you'd expect in the countryside, all the sheep had already been locked inside the barn. The door was bolted shut, and the only light illuminating the scene came from the moon and a faint, strange yellow glow near the barn door. I couldn't tell where the light was coming from, but it was enough to make the place look eerie. I sat there smoking, lost in thought, my gaze fixed absent-mindedly on the barn. That's when I heard it, a sound. The unmistakable clip-clop of hooves. At first I thought I imagined it, but the sound grew louder, clearer. It was as if something had walked out of the barn. My heart jolted, and I snapped out of my daze, the cigarette falling from my fingers. For a second, I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The sound didn't stop. It was deliberate, heavy, and real. I stood up instinctively, panic flooding my mind. Did one of the animals escape? That couldn't happen. Not here. Not in the countryside where livestock meant everything. They were the lifeblood of the villages, their source of food, income, and survival. Losing even a single sheep or cow would be considered a disaster. That's why I panicked. Without thinking, I leaned out the window and shouted toward the house, "Grandpa, wake up! Something's wrong! I think one of the animals escaped from the barn." I kept yelling, louder and louder, but there was no response. The house was completely silent. It was as if no one could hear me at all, despite my shouting. Frustrated and nervous, I turned back toward the barn, hoping to catch sight of whatever had escaped. I peered through the darkness, my eyes straining to see past the pale moonlight. And that's when I saw it. I wish I hadn't looked. The moment I looked again, I saw it. Standing in the middle of the path, bathed in faint moonlight, was a creature, or something that looked like one. I can't even find the words to describe it properly. Its form was massive, its mouth stretched wide into an unnaturally grotesque shape that made my blood run cold. Its teeth, I'll never forget its teeth. They were bone white, jagged and sharp, like shards of ice glistening in the darkness. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. My feet felt glued to the ground, and no matter how much I wanted to move, to run, I couldn't. I stood there, paralyzed, my mind screaming for me to do something, but my body refused to obey. It wasn't because I was weak, no. It was as if something had taken hold of me, keeping me rooted in place. And then I made the worst mistake of all. I looked into its eyes. Our gazes locked for just a moment, but that was enough. Its eyes. Those eyes burned with a madness that sent a wave of sheer terror through my entire being. Suddenly it let out a scream. A sound so inhuman, so piercing, it felt like it was clawing at my very soul. It began shrieking louder and louder, its mouth stretching wider with each cry. I swear it looked as though it could swallow a person whole. The terror hit me like a punch to the chest. My mind went blank. My thoughts scrambled. Was this an animal, a jinn, a demon, or something far worse? Something not of this world. Only God knows what I was looking at. All I wanted in that moment was to recite something from the Quran, to protect myself. But I couldn't. The fear had robbed me of my memory, leaving me unable to recall even a single word. For the first time in my life, I felt real, raw terror. I had never experienced anything like it before. My body was trembling, my knees weak. And then, out of nowhere, it felt like I had been freed. I don't know what happened, but I suddenly collapsed, dropping to my knees right there on the spot. I grabbed a pillow, don't ask me how or why, and covered my head, curling into a ball and muttering the only words I could think of. A'udhu billahi mina shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed devil. I kept repeating it over and over again, my voice trembling. A'udhu billahi mina shaitanir rajim. A'udhu billahi mina shaitanir rajim. And in that moment, everything stopped. The horrifying sound vanished as quickly as it had come, leaving behind an unsettling silence. It was as though nothing had ever happened. All I could hear now was the faint chirping of insects and the croaking of frogs outside. I stayed frozen in place, trying to calm my breathing, straining my ears to make sure I wasn't imagining things. The courage slowly crept back into me, and I dared to lift my head and look around. The creature, it was gone. Had it disappeared? Or had it left? God only knows. I exhaled shakily, whispering a relieved, Alhamdulillah, thanking God. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a sliver of hope. But that fragile calm shattered when I heard a familiar voice calling out to me. Ali, come outside for a bit. The weather's beautiful tonight. It was my cousin's voice. Relief washed over me when I heard him, like I'd just been pulled back to reality. I stood up quickly, eager to see him and get away from the nightmare I'd been trapped in. I headed down the hallway, walking toward the door that led outside. As I passed by the last room at the end of the corridor, I happened to glance inside, and that's when I saw him. My cousin. He was lying on his bed, sound asleep, snoring softly. My legs turned to stone. I couldn't move. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. If Ahmad is here, asleep in his room, then who had been calling out to me outside? And who was it that had stood by my window earlier, telling me to go out for a smoke? My thoughts spiraled, my heart hammering against my chest as the realization dawned on me. If I had followed that voice, what would have happened to me? I stood there trembling, sweat running cold down my face as my hands began to shake uncontrollably. My body felt frozen, the fear pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. And then my mind went back to the creature I had seen earlier, the monstrous, screaming figure. Could it have been the same thing? Could it have been trying to lure me outside, pretending to be Ahmad? I gripped the wall to steady myself, whispering over and over, oh Lord, please get me out of this night safely." Every inch of me was soaked in cold sweat, my body trembling from a terror so deep it froze me to the core. My heart raced as my eyes darted down the empty hallway, desperately hoping nothing else would emerge from the shadows. I gathered what little strength I had left and made my way to the front door. I checked again, twice, to make sure it was locked. Satisfied, I returned to my room, shut the door, and slumped onto the bed. There was only one sentence on my lips, and I repeated it over and over, as if it was the only thing keeping me safe. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed devil. I whispered it like a prayer, clinging to each word as though it could shield me from the horrors I had seen. As I lay there, I tried to convince myself that this was all just a nightmare, a terrible, twisted dream brought on by exhaustion. Please, God, let it just be a bad dream, I repeated to myself. Before I knew it, exhaustion overwhelmed me and I drifted into a deep, troubled sleep. The next thing I remember was waking up to the sound of my family calling me for breakfast. The sun was up, and daylight poured into my room. I sat up, my body heavy, my mind clouded with everything I had gone through the night before. Only God knew the fear I had felt. After eating, I found myself alone with Ahmad and decided I couldn't keep quiet any longer. "Ahmad, I need to ask you something," I said cautiously, "but promise me you won't lie to me." He raised an eyebrow at me, confused. "What's wrong? Go ahead, ask." I swallowed hard and said, "Last night, did you go outside late at night? Did you come to my room and call me out?" Ahmad's expression changed. He looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? Go outside? Come to your room? Ali, you're exhausted from the trip yesterday. You probably just imagined it. I went to sleep at 7:30 last night because I had an early morning shift. I just got back now to rest." His words hit me like a slap. I stared at him, my heart sinking, the blood draining from my face. So who called me? Who tried to lure me outside? I couldn't shake the cold feeling in my chest. I wanted to believe it was just a dream, but it felt far too real. I was still trembling inside, my heart heavy with dread. From that day forward, everything changed for me. I started sleeping earlier, staying close to the rest of the family during the evenings. I'd wake up when they did at the crack of dawn, as if being with them could protect me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The night belongs to others, creatures we don't see, beings God has given their own time to live. We rest during the night, but for them, it's the start of their day. And that brings us to the end of today's story. I hope you enjoyed it, and that it sent chills down your spine. If you did, don't forget to like the video and show your support by subscribing to the channel. And hey, don't keep the scare to yourself. Share this story with your friends so they can experience it too. Your support helps us bring you more terrifying tales like this one. Thank you for sticking around till the end. I'm Phobia, and I'll see you in the next story.